Hello there, everyone. I'm Tre'vell here, reporter at the LA Times. Thanks for joining us for this live chat. Today, we're discussing Beyond Bruce Jenner. As everyone knows, he sat down with Diane Sawyer for an interview this past week, and we're here to discuss how this all impacts the transgender rights movement. Joining me today, we have two local trans activists who are going to give us their thoughts on how we can all move forward from this particular interview. With me, we have Drian Juarez. She is the program manager for the Transgender Economic Empowerment Program with the LA LGBT Center. And we have Jazzmun Crayton. All right, she's a trans artist and activist and producer of this really great documentary called In Full Bloom, Transcending Gender. Thank you both for joining us today. Yeah. So first question, the Bruce Jenner interview. Let's start before the interview. What were kind of your thoughts going into it? What was your hopes, your expectations, and then did that come to fruition after the interview? We can start with you, either one.
Gotcha.
There was a lot of anxiety for me personally before the interview because you never know how these things will go. And it has the potential of setting our community back or to moving us forward. Oftentimes, what happens when somebody comes out, especially when they're a celebrity or so well known, is that they become the poster person for the trans community. And everyone assumes then that this is how all trans people are, trans people are transitioning. And so, that's always the scary part, that you don't know how exactly it's going to come off or what they'll say. And so that's kind of scary.
Gotcha. And what about you, Jazzmun?
Me, myself, I was, I had my reservations. I was nervous as well, that how it would be perceived. But then I had to let my judgment go and realize that we're in an atmosphere, like in a time where people are very knowledgeable and people are seeking out information. They know how to go and get the information. So I know ABC, they would do it. They would do it justice, and they did.
And so having seen it, do you think it does it help the community? Does it push the community forward? Are there still any hangups about how it came off?
So for me, I thought Bruce Jenner did a really great job of describing his transition process, what he went through. I think he did a good job at not generalizing and saying trans people do this. It was very much about his story, very personal. And so I was really happy to see that he was speaking from the heart and speaking about what his transition was like. And so for me, I think that was really great. And ABC handled it, with a lot of delicacy, and also made an effort to educate people and walk through the language, even, discussing pronouns and preferred names.
Right.
I thought that was really great.
Now, Jazzmun, you and I were talking before about how the interview really through social media showed a lot of positive support for Bruce and the transition and the interview. How do you think social media particularly kind of helps these type of conversations when it comes to LGBT people in general, when it comes to coming out and telling their particular stories?
Well, just like you said, it creates conversation. It creates a platform where people get to express where they're at, where they've been, and where they hope to go. And I do believe it does so much, for someone, an iconic person. We were also speaking, I was saying how this person has been in the media, has been a celebrity, like since the 70s, like before,
Right.
you were born.
Right.
We were
very much
that,
so. Very much so.
And it was very natural for Bruce to sit in front of the camera. It was almost as if the cameras were not there.
Right. Right.
It was a very comfortable situation. So it does help on a broader level, but there's so much work to be done on a, much smaller level,
right?
Because so many of our trans women and men are without jobs, without homes, without a place where they can come together and vocalize who they are and where they are in their transition. Because you're going to get 100,000 different opinions from 100,000 different trans women and men. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it creates this conversation, and on so many levels where it got people questioning themselves.
Right.
As they should.
As they should. So now, as you were talking about, there's like so much more work to be done. In the interview, he did mention I think it's like 7 or 8 trans women, all of color, that were murdered. I think it's the first 2 months of the year. according to the media, at least if you look at the media, there's not necessarily much coverage of that. Media Matters, which is like a media watchdog, they did this report where they evaluated all of the network television shows and cable television shows, news shows, and it came out that virtually nobody mentioned or even talked about the 7 trans women who were murdered. The majority of the coverage dealing with trans issues has been focused on Bruce Jenner and the interview. Very little mention of Leila Alcorn, the transgender teen in Ohio, I believe, that committed suicide earlier this year. Why do you think that there's only a focus on the media side on the Bruce Jenners or even the Laverne Coxes or the Janet Mocks, as opposed to the very real issues, very real work that needs to be done?
Well, I'm going to debate it just a little bit about the part of it not being covered, because here in Los Angeles, I actually marched twice. I didn't get, unfortunately, go to the one where the young lady died on they did the March on Melrose because I had to work. But they did cover it pretty good. And even the march that they had there, they covered very well. And the particular one that I went to, which was on Western Slauson, they actually did an excellent coverage of that one. And what was terrifying a little bit to me, it was on a dead-end street. You know, it was the second time that a trans woman was murdered on a dead-end street. It was very symbolic. It was just like there was nowhere to go, even us standing there in the news. But to answer your question, the answer for me is that they don't know who we are. And us as a community are still learning who we are. Like, the community is not the same. We don't get the same notoriety. We don't have the same privileges. I'm going to use that word. The same privileges as other people, you know, in the LGB community. You know what I'm saying? We're still trying to figure out, again, housing, places where we actually come together. You know, there's a lot of trans, you know, women and men without job, you know, they can't take care of their basic needs.
Right.
And those that can, you know, it can be a struggle. The struggle is real. And just to answer your question, it's like the community for me personally is still under construction, still developing, even though it's been around forever. But us coming together to form, you know, unity, and I'm going to speak on, you know, we're part of a wonderful group, the TSPN, which I'm sure she'll be speak more about because she's been on it longer. But it's a group where we help change policy. Create policy, change policy, and make sure our voices are heard on all the different panels throughout the greater Los Angeles. So I'm going to let her expound on that.
God.
And, you know, I think that's why it's important to have people like Janet Mock and Laverne Cox who, you know, are at the celebrity status because they use that platform to bring it back to the real issues affecting transgender people. And they don't let media get distracted by our transition, by our bodies, what have you. And so I think it's important that more trans celebrities are out there and that they're using this platform to really talk about the issues that are affecting us. And yes, you know, trans people are being murdered for our identity. And so unfortunately, media does not recognize this as a civil rights issue. They think it's a fringe issue, this small little community. No, but this is about our basic rights to be who we feel we are.
Now, I want to highlight some of those kind of tangential or associated issues with the transgender rights movement. We've heard in the media about transgender people in prison and things like that. We've heard about Chelsea Manning, CeCe McDonald. We've heard about the conversation about whether or not transgender people should be able to serve openly in the military. We've heard conversations about gender neutral bathrooms and single sex institutions, educational institutions, and whether they should be allowing people to transgender people to enter their ranks. This national conversation, which I think by many people's ideas and thoughts is not where it should be or as prevalent as it should be. What can we do to increase that conversation and to make it an appropriate conversation and a respectful conversation?
Stay informed and stay on the front line and make sure it is a conversation all the time, every day. Like, do not become complacent. Don't get comfortable. You know, the whole thing about it is like, if you're coming up, you got to make sure 2 more girls and boys are coming up. You got to make sure that you create a place and a platform where they get to express themselves openly and freely. Because again, I met a young lady at a national conference where she was having issues on her campus. I think she was in the Burns documentary about being able to, in her transition, to go and live in the women's dorm. And the teacher, she explained to me, or the professor was like, that's not happening until you have your sex change. And I see it physically. I thought, well, what is that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's an education it's an educational thing that's a constant. Like people gotta constantly be educated, like spoon-fed every day. You gotta give them a little something every day.
Right.
So it's ingrained in their psyche.
In terms of that education process, we were talking about how this seems to be somehow to be the perfect time for this conversation around transgender rights. I know, Jazzmun, you mentioned how the same-sex marriage and marriage equality conversation has, it's pretty much inevitable that, it's going to be legalized everywhere. Supreme Court is having the conversation, or I think ruling on it tomorrow, I believe. From you, Drian, I want to know, why do you think this is the perfect time, or the time that the attention seems to be coming around to the trans community and the different issues you all are experiencing?
I think part of it is the connection to information. Growing up, I didn't know there were trans people, didn't know there were LGBT people. There were no role models on television. There was no internet. So I felt very isolated. I think what Jazzmun was saying is perfect. It's about connecting with community, whether it's your local community, your online community. That's how you build power. The Transgender Service Provider Network, the TSPN, that's what we do. We get together and talk about the issues that are affecting us in our community. So we find each other and we build power together. I think that's really, really key. And what's really, really sort of linking us all together is the fact that we can, watch a Google chat about issues, that we can connect with community, that we can get onto YouTube and put up a video about what I'm going through today. I think we're connected in a way that we've never been before.
Right.
And so this is the time to collectively utilize our power to make things better.
Now, I want to talk about some of the policy things that I know we're kind of going through locally. You work with the Transgender Economic Empowerment Program, and we've talked before about, and you just mentioned how the difficulty for many trans people to get jobs and accessing the necessary skills in order to get those jobs and keep those jobs. Could you talk a little bit about kind of how that all works, the work that you do specifically?
Definitely. I think what I've seen in my work, and I've been running the program for about 7 years now, is that it's really gone from employers who are having this knee-jerk reaction of, oh my God, somebody's transitioning, what do we do? How do we do this? To now they're seeing the value of developing transition guidelines, for example. So now I'm getting calls. In the past, it was getting calls of somebody's transitioning, we don't know what to do, we're in a panic. And now I'm getting calls, we want to develop transition guidelines because we want to be better employers. So there's a switch happening, and employers are seeing the value of having a workforce that is diverse and that feels protected and that feels honored in the workplace. And they're seeing the value of that. I think the difficult part for people is understanding the difference between sex and gender. There's still a lot of misunderstanding about what that is. And unfortunately, so many people still equate genitalia with your gender identity. And what trans people are saying is that that's not how identity is formed.
Right.
And I think that's where we're at. That a lot of people just don't understand that. We grow up in this binary system where, your genitals define you. And trans people are saying that's not the way that it is, actually. And that's what's really difficult for people who are not part of the LGBT community to understand. And then that also touches on their fear on bathroom access. There's a lot of fear with cisgendered communities, so communities whose identity at birth is the same identity they have as adults. They have a lot of fear about trans people using the restroom, and it's often about genitalia. Well, what's between your legs? How are you going to prove to me what's between your legs so that I feel safe with you in the bathroom?
Right.
And so we're at that moment now where we're getting people to really take a look at what is that fear that we have and why. And I think that's where we're at right now, that people are learning to take a step back and identify, well, what am I afraid of?
Gotcha. And now for you, Jazzmun, I want to talk a little bit about the In Full Bloom documentary that you all did, that you helped executive produce. in the documentary, you all basically kind of chronicle putting together this play in Hollywood.
Yes.
And it's a group of mainly transgender, but also a couple gay folks as well. And you all kind of hit at a variety of different issues that transgender people go through, particularly locally. Tell us a little bit about the documentary and what you hope people kind of take from it, considering this conversation that we're now having around transgender issues.
Yeah, I want everyone to see the movie. And my goal is to put the play up. And I want to thank Drian sitting here. She was very instrumental in making sure that the play did get put up at the center, Gay Lesbian Center. And it was very organic. It was something I had been talking with my brothers and sisters about their lives and where they were coming from and some of the issues. You know, we don't get to talk about like sex work and how it affects us and how it's sometimes a necessity. Because we're not able to go out, you know, as a community and go work at the department stores or whatnot. So, and also talked about religion and spirituality, like the difference, you know, how some of us are religious.
Right.
Like we come from all different backgrounds. We come from all different cultures. I have an Indian sister from India. You know, I had to learn about how she's once told me that it would be an honored death to kill her, knowing that she's a trans woman. And I, you know, it moved me. You know, I was really affected by that. And so with the help of my friend David Hayes Gaddis, we wrote these vignettes and we put it up, you know, we got our opportunity to put up on stage. So everybody under the umbrella was explored. You know, I explored cross-dressing. I explored sex work, trans bashing. There's been a lot of trans bashing. Like I'm a survivor of a bashing. You know what I'm saying? Like someone came up behind me and cold called me and knocked me out in the CVS parking lot. Wow. You know, it's like, oh my God, thank God I'm still here. And I still hear these stories. You know, homelessness. My job at APHC, I work at a healthcare place where, you know, I'm constantly, my program that I'm running, the HEART program, is constantly educating and empowering trans women and gender nonconforming, because you gotta allow some fluidity, you gotta allow a person that whole space to grow and evolve. Like transition is constant. There's no end to it. Right. You know what I'm saying? And when you start is when you start. You know, the conversation that we have at work, because I work with 3 other trans women and men, and we can agree to disagree a lot of times, you know, because we all have our opinions. But one thing we were talking about this morning, because I asked them, was like, you know, about transitioning and the youth being able to transition now. And, you know, people questioning Bruce's transition at 6 years old. I think Dr. Phil made a comment like he's almost 80. Why bother? Right. And it's that my whole thing with saying something like that, it's like Bruce must transition. It's a must. The work that needed to be done as Bruce Jenner, the athlete, the icon, is done. Right. Allow Bruce that ability to transition to whomever and whatever at whatever time. You know, because the question can also be with the youth. It's like, you should be in school learning about ABCs. Why are you worrying about transition? And with the elders, they want to say, you know, why now? Right. You know, it's always, well, why not? Right. Why not? So that was the whole point. I just wanted some visibility. I wanted my actors to be able to tell stories, not only their stories, but stories of their brothers and sisters in the community, right? And have them see themselves being reflected. And all the actors are actually trans experience, and all the stories were received. I went and interviewed several trans women and men locally, and got there, and in San Francisco, and got some of their, you know, input and took their stories. You know, we had to fictionalize it, so you couldn't say, oh, that's right, you know. Right. But yeah, we took their stories and made a beautiful, you know, bouquet of flowers. Right. And that was the symbolism. Like, there's so many different beautiful flowers. We're not all the same. Even though, you know, we're under this like beautiful umbrella, there's so many different stories that have to be explored and expressed. So that's one thing I think I really liked about the documentary, and everybody should try to see it. It premiered at the Pan-African Film Festival a couple months ago. Did very well. Let's go to social media. As I told you guys, we have some folks from social media asking us a couple questions. This one's from Ahmad Barber. He wants to know, has this interview helped more than it has harmed, or vice versa?
For me, I believe it helped. And I think part of what I saw as really impactful was Bruce Jenner's history, going from this all-American athlete to being perceived as sort of the height of masculinity, to then transitioning to female. I think it's bridging so many different communities. And I think part of what's been difficult is the youth get it. For youth, it's a non-issue. They're cool about it, but it's the parents who have a difficult time understanding trans and transition. And I think this is really, Bruce Jenner's story is really bridging those two communities, the parent and the youth. And I think that's really going to be something that helps.
Gotcha. What about you?
Anytime there's talk about the healing and growth, it's positive on every level. It's positive.
And he also asks, Ahmad Barber also asks, is Bruce Jenner welcomed now as the new face of trans with open arms?
Bruce is a face.
Yes,
A face.
exactly.
Right.
Is another beautiful face in the bouquet of flowers of the trans, spectrum. Just another beautiful face that gets to come. And I invite Bruce to come down to our organizations and sit in and share and listen, because actually the people's story that Bruce is going to hear are just as fabulous and just as valid as Bruce's story. And Bruce is going to learn a lot once Bruce comes into the community and learn about like the difficulty about getting on the bus down at the metro and riding without being heckled or possibly attacked. Or dealing with your brothers and sisters who may be involved in sex trade or drugs. Or going to the mall and seeing some of the girls working in the department stores and having a conversation with them, helping Bruce get the nail polish and the blush and the makeup that Bruce was desiring in the interview.
Right.
Because the girls are working behind the counter.
Right.
Like the girls and the boys, we're everywhere. We're everywhere. I did mention some of us are not working, but there are a lot of us that have wonderful jobs, wonderful relationships, wonderful families. It's all about normalizing the situation.
Right.
It's a human person, but our lives need to be normalized. Like you have to see us in every aspect. That's very important.
I think that's one thing interesting about where media is now is we see the Bruce Jenner interview. There are 4 or 5 shows in the works now that are coming out this summer around the trans experience. There's one following Jazz Jennings on TLC. All that jazz. There's another one called Becoming Us coming on ABC Family in June. It seems to be kind of like you said, at a space where we can normalize and have the conversation with a varied representation of what it means to be trans. My last question that I have for both of you is, where do we go from here? We've had this what seems to be like a great conversation started with Bruce's interview that has already been going on in other circles. But where can we go from here on the policy side, on the actual lived day-to-day experience side? Where can we go?
For me, I think it's really about reassessing the way we assign identity. I think that's where it all starts for trans people, when we are assigned the wrong identity and then are forced into that identity. I think it starts with parents who recognize that diversity exists and that maybe I don't need to put a label on my child so early on. Maybe I can just let my child be until they can tell me who they are and what their life is. I think when we get to that point where we let people tell us what their life is, what their pronoun is, what their name is, I think that's when we know that we've gotten to some real change.
Right.
And hopefully by that point, then we won't need the laws that protect us, because everyone will understand each other and will understand that there's diversity within your gender identity, not just your ethnicity, your age, or what have you. So for me, that's the ultimate goal, really reassessing the way we assign identity and not being so rigid about that.
Gotcha. And what about for you, Jazzmun?
For me, we're human beings. We got the good and the bad. My whole thing is, do not get complacent. Do not get too comfortable. The struggle is real. Freedom is not free. It comes at a high price. Do the work, especially for those that are allies. Make sure you continue to stay allies and stay connected. Get out there and be of service. Like I said earlier, if you're coming up, make sure 2 more coming up, and practice the verbiage, practice your language. practice, practice healing yourself.
Mhm.
Do things that are not only gratifying you, but gratifying the community at large. Like, find out what is going on, find out how policies are being made. Like in California, we're very fortunate, we're getting hormones and everything, we can change our names. But in Arizona, it's not the same.
Right,
In
right.
Philadelphia and Atlanta, they have different rules.
Most
They don't have,
states.
the red states don't have like Obamacare.
Right.
You're waiting like maybe 10 hours
Right.
just to get into the emergency room. Like, let's not play games. Like, people are being affected on so many different levels. It's just the beautiful thing about this interview. It just creates this large conversation. It's a one where people are questioning, what am I doing to make sure that another human being is living a full and prosperous, wonderful, life. So that's my whole thing, is like, don't sleep. Wake up, don't sleep.
Thank you both for joining us so much.
Thank you.
And you all can continue the conversation on social media using the hashtag #AskLATimes. Tweet us, let us know, leave comments on our Facebook page and all that good stuff. Until then, you can check out latimes.com for all your latest news. Thank you all for joining us.